Hey, so welcome to another episode of the Flow Tribe podcast, a podcast dedicated to the movers, breathers, teachers, healers, and creators of the world. So in this episode, I'm speaking with a healer. Her name is Viviane Cyr, and she is a physiotherapist based in Montreal, Canada. She's also the founder of Santri, this amazing new treatment center, which recently celebrated its 1-year anniversary. So in this episode, we dive into the philosophy behind Santri and the way that they've really created this unique approach which combines healing but also training. And they bring it together by not just having this one person take care of you when you go there, but having an entire team of specialists behind you as you work through an injury, as you try to become stronger and better either at your sport or just, for movement in life in general. We also dive into something that Viviane specializes in, which is the treatment of MMA and combat sport athletes. So as a physiotherapist, Viviane works with some of the best MMA athletes and combat sport athletes, not only in Montreal, but in the world. We also talk about the importance of autonomy when it comes to our own bodies. Movement is something that I'm extremely passionate about. It's something that Viviane is very passionate about. And we really talked about, especially during this time of COVID, where it's so important to take responsibility for your own body, right? And we also talk about some of the ways that they had to pivot and had to evolve their own practices during COVID. And they came up with some pretty amazing solutions, which we dive into. So I really, really enjoyed this conversation. I'm pretty sure you will too. So without further ado, here is my conversation with Viviane Cyr. Hi, Viviane. Thank you so much for being here. I can't wait to get started on this conversation. So to start, maybe we could have you introduce yourself, tell us who you are and what you do.
So thank you for having me. So I'm Viviane Cyr. I'm a physical therapist here in Montreal, Canada. I own the Replay Center, which is a sports rehab and physiotherapy center. And we do optimization of movement to help optimizing sports performance.
Okay, so first of all, thank you for doing this in English. I think by your accent, people can probably tell that you are French Canadian. But I think what you were mentioning before we started recording is that you're working more and more with a lot of professional athletes, especially professional MMA fighters. Mm-hmm. And a lot of these people just don't speak French. So you've had to take on this challenge of learning a new language and especially working in a new language.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I think you've also have some aspirations for your business, partnerships that you want to explore. And I think that it's great that you're willing to take on this challenge of doing this interview in English. So thank you for doing this.
Thank you.
Yeah. So you mentioned Santri Replay, and we spoke, we actually had an interview in French a couple of years ago where you were talking about the idea behind it because it was yet to have happened. Mm-hmm. And what I loved about your concept in Replay is that you were talking about physiotherapy as more than just a therapy, right? There's the part that happens when, let's say, the injury happens immediately after the injury. But then your concern was that in many cases, therapists are sending these athletes out away from therapy, but they're not quite ready yet to actually go back to play, right? And so you wanted to create a place where not only could they get great therapy to help with their injuries, but they would also have a space where they could slowly readapt themselves to getting back into the game, right? So maybe you could touch on that a little bit, because I thought that was pretty amazing. And I think what you're offering is something that's actually pretty unique as someone who's been through, a lot of physiotherapy and also into a lot of gyms and centers like yours. I've yet to see that concept. So I think it would be great if you could touch on that and what your idea was behind that.
So there was the idea, and now there is the how it happened or how it's living right now. So when we have athletes that want to go back to sport, I'm talking about athletes, but we also have workers and regular people. They want to get back to their activities or their job. I'm going to talk about return to play in general, or like it's for not only sports people, but it's for regular people.
Everybody gets hurt. So
everybody gets hurt, and everybody wants to have, like, they have a bigger goal. So like it's getting back to play, and then in most rehab clinic, they don't have them they don't do the micro objective and the micro objective. So we break down the rehab process in steps, but like very, very defined steps as a team. And then we work together with rehab specialists, physiotherapists, movement specialists, trainers to bring them back step by step to play. And we have protocol, very defined protocols on how to, so what to do in which step to make sure that everything is checked before you start loading, before you start running, before you start pivoting, lifting heavy weights, doing muscle up and everything. So like we reintegrate the proper motor control movement, we reintegrate the proper strength, proper like how to feel your articulation, how to feel your body, to make sure that when you're back to sport, you practice all the movement before, and then you're really ready to get back to sport. So when you're on the field or like for gymnasts or whatever, they already practice the motion so they won't get hurt again. And this way is also a way to make sure that the movement is better than it was before. So it also helps increasing the performance of the athlete.
Right. So it's almost like I come to you with an injury and I leave stronger than I was before the injury.
That's the point.
That's
the point,
right?
Actually. Yeah, that's the point.
Yeah.
Because
I think that's amazing, because I think what you're touching on is that, movement as a whole is something that a lot of people, especially in sport, right? I mean, we can talk about the regular person, but I think in sport, people have these very specific movements to their sport. And often we grow up, a high level athlete has probably grown up, spent most of their lives only practicing that sport, which is how they were able to get to that level. But then suddenly you find that sport is limited because there's a lot of movement, aspects of movement that are not explored. And that's what probably leads to some unbalances in the body. And
actually, it's not even like a movement that are not practiced. I see high level professional athletes doing motion that they're doing every day. And I'm like, how didn't you get injured before? There is some things I see in high level professional athletes. I'm like, oh my God, you need to fix that. Otherwise it's going to have a big impact on your career. And so when I have the opportunity of seeing those athletes and to test them, because now the good thing is that I've been working with mostly TriStar guys, like UFC fighters, MMA, professional athletes. And then so my reputation is made, so they trust me. So when I tell them, we really need to work on your motion. So like in your off season or like off camp, gonna get back to the basic and then relearn how to move your thoracic cage, relearn how to move your shoulder blade, relearn how to put your weight under your foot and those kind of things. So now I get to work on these things before it gets an injury. But like, it's not just motion that they don't do, it's also movement that they do in a bad way. So like you take the movement that they already doing in a bad way, plus you add the imbalance due to the sport, because for example, we're talking about MMA, using a lot of the anterior chain here, so they have what we call an upper cross syndrome often. It's like big tension in the neck, rounded shoulder, because they're like this all the time. So they have like neck problem, shoulder problem, so imbalances because they're not using muscle of the back. Yeah, so like you add these to the movement that is not the motion they're doing in a bad way. So it's like it just adds up causes of injuries that we can fix.
Yeah, I wish I'd known you 20 years ago. This 20 years of Muay Thai in my body has led me to having now in my 40s, having some pretty serious neck injuries, neck issues, shoulder issues, which I'm learning slowly to fix. But the longer you go without addressing these things, the harder it is to bring it back. Right.
And with the traditional way of like strengthening, for example, like Muay Thai with the clinch, so you have like neck injuries, and then the solution is so sometimes they do neck bridges. You've probably seen that, but like, it's okay, neck bridges is okay when your neck is fine. When your neck is not fine, it's not okay to do neck bridges.
No, it's not good.
So the whole traditional ways of strengthening with martial arts, like very typical with like the Kung Fu and Muay Thai, and to strengthen the weakness and then get injured even more.
Yeah, and I think What's interesting also, I think, about working with someone like you, and I've met a few therapists in the past who understand the martial arts and understand these sports, because for a lot of therapists who don't know them, like I've been on the table of either an osteopath or a physiotherapist, and they're looking at my body like, how did you do this to yourself? Right? Why does your foot turn out this way? Why is your neck such a mess? And it's hard for them to understand the why. But I think once you understand the sport, then you're less resistant to, okay, that's what's going on. So let's figure out a way that
Mm-hmm.
not only, and also fighters aren't going to stop, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like you can't tell a fighter, sorry, you're going to have to take the next 6 weeks off training. No, that's not going to happen, right? This mentality is, no, you fix me, but I'm not going to stop training unless it's a
Mm-hmm.
very serious injury that they don't have a choice. So I
Mm-hmm.
think that someone like you has kind of that understanding of the sport, first of all, and knowing where these injuries come from, and then being able to not only treat those injuries if they happen, but also to help people now prevent these injuries from
Mm-hmm.
either happening at all or from happening again. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it makes total sense. Like you're giving example of like of martial art athletes, but the one of the best examples, circus athletes and contortionists,
Okay.
that they have injuries, but they have injuries in like a high range of motion, or like a further range of motion,
Yeah.
and like a regular physiotherapist, or like some physiotherapists would say just stop doing this motion, and then they're like, no, it's part of their job, they need to be able to get there, so you need to help them go in this range of motion, or go in this position without injuring themselves, so make sure they're really strong and stable so they can do that. So our job is not to tell them to stop training and to stop doing motion, is to tell them what to do before and when to do those movements, or like in what condition you can go there.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I also think also something you touched on before is that you're not alone in this, right? You've built this team around you. And
Mm-hmm.
that was something else that we talked about in the last interview, or maybe just in
Mm-hmm.
conversation, where you were looking forward to having a bunch of people sitting at a big table, and the case comes in, and it's not just you figuring out what's the best physiotherapy for this person, it's what's the best total global approach to helping this person. So once your
Mm-hmm.
job is done, maybe you move that person on to the movement specialist, or you move that person on to someone else who then can use their expertise to continue that person's journey into becoming better at all aspects of their training and movement. So maybe touch
Yeah.
on that a little bit, because I think that's amazing. I think that this approach could be used in so many other aspects of business and other aspects of training and everything else, but I'd love for you to talk
Mm-hmm.
about that a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Actually, this is the main project we're on right now, because to be able to have a good interdisciplinary approach, we need to have the same vocabulary, the same way of thinking, because there is different ways to see, like you see in sports, in fitness, in health, there is different mentality. So we need to have a better approach, we need to have different mentality, but compatible mentalities, and making sure that we have the same vocabulary. So we're building this, that our first year was like focused on making sure this was right. And now it's checked. So we have the opportunity, we had mental performance coaches, nutritionists, occupational therapists, so like very like mindset specialists, different kind of physiotherapists, different kind of like athletic therapists, osteopath, that put their mentality, their method, how they were doing things, and then we tried to take the best of every approach and to build something that is very, very, very nice, very solid. And so it's a work in progress still. It's getting better and better all the time, but it's so exciting right now to be able to when you have because there's no therapy that is good. There's no therapy or training method that is 100% good and 100% good for everybody. So you need to know what is good for this person, and sometimes you're doing the best, you're doing something good, but like it doesn't work for this person because of this reason, because there's so many aspect on a rehab or on a healing. um, so we need to find, so I'm like, okay, my techniques are not necessarily good for this person, or like are not necessarily the best for this person. Oh, I have this other therapist that can work with them, and then like for a couple time or whatever, and then they come back to me when they're ready to move on. So we work as a team. The file is central. The plan is to make sure this method rose and this method is functional and optimal. And after that, the plan is to teach people how to work this way, because this is the way it should be done, we think, because we don't want to see people as like, okay, this is just my client and I want to keep them forever, and then like making sure they come back only to me. No, we want the people to be good, to get better. We want to bring them back to their activities. We want to make sure that they get what they need, because that's the point of treating people. That's the point of like trying to heal people.
Yeah, and I think also what you're touching on is it's something that you see. One of the biggest issues I think in the medical world as well is that we're treating the symptoms and we're not treating the cause, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if I get injured and I come to you and you fix my injury but do nothing to make sure it doesn't happen again, then you're almost kind of making sure I come back, right? And you don't want me to
Mm-hmm.
come back. Ideally, you know, if I'm injured and you fix that injury, technically you should give me the ways for me to not come back for that specific injury
Mm-hmm.
again, right? I also think as a business model, what you're talking about is, you know, maybe I come in initially for therapy because I injured myself in whichever way, but then you're kind of keeping me in this program because now that I'm better, I want to keep coming back so I can continue improving my body,
Mm-hmm.
so I can continue becoming stronger. So maybe I'm not coming back for therapy, but I'm coming back for the movement classes. I'm coming back for the yoga. I'm coming back for all of those amazing things that you have to offer, because now I'm part of this system, right? And at some point, if I'm very serious about my sport, chances are I'll get injured again, something else, because injuries are not, it's impossible to avoid if you're performing at a very high level.
Mm-hmm.
But I know that coming
Mm-hmm.
back to you, to your system, I get to go through that system. And there's something about that. As someone who's experienced all those different things, you know, it's great to go see a therapist, but if you leave there with this sense of like, okay, but what happens if, right? As where if I'm in the system now and I know that whatever happens, someone's going to take care of me. I think that's such an amazing model, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And also maybe I'm changing subject, but like you have so our point. So if we have people that come from like different, so we say like, oh, we see an injury as an opportunity. It's like, okay, you're injured in your shoulder. It's an opportunity to fix the way you move in your upper body. So if you have like a graphic with the strength and the coordination. So I'm just going to give a simple example. So if you have like an exercise or a movement that requires a maximum of strength, you will not be able to perform a high level of coordination. And then, but if you ask a movement that asks a high level of coordination, you cannot do it in a maximum level of strength. You know, it's very complex, so you cannot do it strongly. So there is like a kind of a curve. I don't know if I should explain this without a graphic, but anyway, there's kind of a curve. So like the more complex is the movement, the less strong can be the movement, and the more strong is the movement, the less complex the movement can be. And there is a curve. So our job as a movement specialist, physiotherapists should be movement specialists. Our job as a movement specialist is to level up that curve and to make sure that the middle space where the movement can be strong and complex can be switched to higher demand. So you can do a higher demand of strength in a higher demand of coordination and still be able to do that motion. So it reduces the chances of getting injured and it increases the performances. Does it make sense?
Yeah, that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Okay.
Yeah, I think so. I'm following. I'm following. In other words, that, you know, like you'll have these very complex movements where often it's more about your ability to perform that movement and less your body's ability to do it with strength, right? As where there's also some movements that are very simple movements that you can do with a lot of strength, but you would never be able to do that same thing with a high level of coordination if it
Exactly.
demanded it, right?
And the principle of
Yeah,
most of sports is to be able to do a maximum level of strength in your complex movement. So like
yeah,
sport is complex movement, but you want to do it
exactly.
strong, you know?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that with a lot of athletes in any sport, what you see are athletes with a talent for movement, but whose bodies sometimes aren't at the same level as their ability to move. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like you'll see athletes who, when they're young, they get away with it because they have a young body and they're able, and over time, the body starts to wear down. And then suddenly they're trying to perform those same movements at that same level, but their body hasn't kept up. And I think that that's a huge difference in sports today compared to sports maybe 20 years ago, where now you're seeing athletes in their 30s and 40s performing at the same level as athletes in their 20s. And I think to
Mm-hmm.
me, that is the biggest proof that strength and conditioning and understanding movement has a
Mm-hmm.
huge impact on performance, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because even in professional sports, we're seeing athletes in their 30s and 40s still competing and still
Mm-hmm.
performing at a super high
Mm-hmm.
level.
Mm-hmm.
So if you had to, obviously there's a lot involved, but what would you say are some of the most important things to focus on for longevity in sport? Because I think that's something that even young athletes need to start taking seriously now so that they can have a much better future.
Mm-hmm. I would say proper recovery, which is often the thing that young athlete messed up so much, and then like when they get older, they're starting to realize, I should have recovered more. Um, I would say proper movement pattern too. And is that like what you were looking for
Yeah,
as an answer? Okay,
yeah,
and also I would say trying to be aware of like being responsible of your own body. Your body is your machine. It's your only tool for your job. So you need to be responsible of it. So don't just take what people tell you to do and just apply it, and or you need to have a warm-up routine before your training, before your workout, and you need to be able to before every workout, every game or whatever, make an inventory of like, okay, how do I feel? What can I do? What can't I do today? How can I change that? So like to make sure that, yeah, you're responsible of your machine. I would say
yeah.
those three.
Yeah, and I think what you talked about recovery, sometimes it's not just taking the time to recover, but it's also recognizing like on a day, and I think we've seen this a lot in MMA, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
MMA fighters, it's almost like a multidisciplinary sport, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
they're
Mm-hmm.
performing several sports simultaneously. They're wrestling, they're doing Muay Thai, they're doing Jiu-Jitsu, they're doing strength and conditioning sessions. And each one of those is a very different animal that
Mm-hmm.
uses all different parts of the body, that uses different movement patterns. So, right. So it's not like a tennis player who's just doing tennis every day. These guys are doing
Mm-hmm.
4 or 5 different sports simultaneously. And I
Yeah.
think often what happens is, I've often, as someone who's trained with a lot of these guys, often the training camp is much worse than the fight, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because the fight is a 15-minute event. The training camp is 6 weeks of intense training. And that's where most of the
Mm-hmm.
injuries happen.
Yeah.
Right. And I
Yeah.
think that you're seeing fighters now or mentalities where, guess what? Some days it's okay to take a break, right? It's that mindset of beast mode all day, every day. Suddenly it's like, if I take this day off and skip a few sessions, I will be stronger and more capable of performing. And I
Mm-hmm.
think in many sports now we're seeing that where less is more a little bit when it comes to training.
It's still hard for most of them.
Yeah.
It's really hard actually. Some of them are like I would say not mature, but like they understand that they need to take a break and then they take it. But like a lot of them, they have an injury, they have a lot of pain, and I'm like, yeah, you shouldn't be doing your training tonight. And they're like, you're like,
Yeah.
how? Why? I'm like, you cannot even lift your arm. No, you shouldn't spar. And then anyway, it's still in progress. You're right that there is a progression, but there is still learning to do. uh, but it's more and more like people are getting out of the old ways of training slowly, but like it's coming. And but something that I see often with MMA fighters, if I compare MMA to boxers, for example, which is like very similar, it's combat sport. um, MMA as they do, as you said, they do a lot of different sport, they already have so many trainings during the week. So like the strength and conditioning training often is like the extra work. A lot of athletes don't even have a routine of strength and conditioning, or they don't have good follow-ups or good plans, or so the ones that I saw that have the best strength and conditioning plans often come from other countries, and so in their country they had a proper plan, or sometimes they have the plans from the UFCPI, which is great, but some of them are not even training, which is having a big impact, I think, on their camp and recovery and injuries and everything. And they get really, really tired, and sometimes they do. I'm so sorry. And sometimes, like as they're training, it's not like in another sport, tennis, for example, where they can work on the technique a little bit more, or those MMA is often in the camp. They are often. I'm sorry, I did the reference to tennis. I don't really know about tennis actually, but I'm just gonna talk about MMA. They often push 100% in every training, and then sometimes they add strength and conditioning, which is pushing maximum, maximum, maximum. And then they get at the end of the week, they do their sparring. They are tired of the whole week, so they perform bad. So it gets in their head, and they're like, oh, I'm not ready because I got beaten by this guy who's not as good as me and not as good as my future opponent. So it gets in their head. But they should be aware of, like, yes, you overtrained the whole week. That's normal. That's you had a bad performance at the end of the week. And some of them are even too tired to do their physio exercises. And I'm like, if you're too tired to have your focus on doing your physio exercises, it's a sign that your sparring will not be as efficient as it would be if you were 100% ready and recovered for this very important part of your training.
Yeah, and I think also a part of it also comes down to coaching, and it comes down to the camp that you're a part of, right? Because in MMA, especially as you're starting off, most of these younger guys or girls, they're usually coming up either on their own, right? So they're kind of responsible for all their scheduling. They're responsible for finding their camp. They're finding their trainings. They're finding their strength and conditioning. So they don't really have a system. They don't really have a plan to follow. And like you said, after you do your jujitsu training, your wrestling, your boxing, your Muay Thai, oh, wait, strength and conditioning, right? Because that's always going to be the last thing. That's always going to be the thing that I can't skip any of those other things. So if there's no,
actually, there's even after that recovery, active recovery.
Yeah. And also, there's also the fact that these are not professional athletes most of the time. These are amateur athletes. So guess what? They also have jobs, right? They're also working a job, or they're in school, or there's something else in their lives where suddenly the strength and conditioning and the recovery and that all seems to be in last place, right? Where unfortunately, if you don't do that, that's where it's exactly what you were mentioning. You get to the sparring at the end of the week and your body's all beat up and you're tired and you're not going to perform well. And it's either going to lead either to injury, or it just leads to a bad performance, which is going to affect you mentally, right? So yeah, it's tough. It's tough. But I think what you're saying, and I hope people who listen to this understand, like, make that time, especially, even like I remember for me, it was yoga. As soon as I added a little bit of yoga on a, 2-3 times a week, and I'm not talking even going to yoga class, it was just certain yoga movements that targeted those parts of my body that had a harder time. Suddenly sparring got easier. All my trainings got easier just because, and also the breathing. Breathing is so powerful, and I could talk about that forever because that's my passion now, is understanding breath work and understanding the impact it can have on the nervous system and your recovery, and just understanding performance, right? And flow states and all that amazing stuff. But I think if you can just take the time to really connect with your body, and that's something we talked about in the last interview that I loved what you said about, was really understanding your own body and understanding how it moves and allowing yourself to explore that type of movement, where suddenly you become more aware of those little things. Like, oh, that's different. Maybe there's something going on there. Maybe I should consult with someone about that. So maybe talk about that a little bit, like the importance of really connecting to movement and connecting to your body as a way to recover from injury, but also as a way to prevent injury. Well, or maybe just some sort of strategy that people can take to really do that, right? Because I think that what we're seeing now more and more, And I'll take someone who you work with, which is my friend Max, who, to me, he was one of the first guys that I met, or people that I met, who was all about movement. It wasn't about exercise. It wasn't about training. It wasn't about any specific sport. It was just movement and exploring all these different ways of movement. And there's actually this movement culture that's going on now, which is this idea of moving for no other reason than moving, right? It's not about winning. It's not about losing. It's not about personal gains. It's not about personal bests. It's just it's just
Like, yeah.
moving for the sake of moving. And I think when you learn to do that, and like animal flow and all of these really cool movement patterns that people are exploring now, when you do that, suddenly you have a very different relationship with your body. And so I would love maybe if you could touch on that a little bit, and understanding the importance of movement in that sense, which then allows you to explore any sport or any activity that you want, really.
Okay, I thought you were talking about MMA fighters, but yeah, in general, I would
Yeah.
say you're supposed to be able to move in every plane. Like every articulation is supposed to move in every plane, and then the more you move in multidirectional dimension, as you talked about, like animal flow and those kind of things, what is interesting is that you get to end of range mobility, and then you can feel where you have weaknesses and which movement are hard to do, and which range of motion is hard to get. So the more you do it, the more aware you become of where you are stiff and where you are not agile, and then you can work on those movements and being able to gain your body, to win over your body, and to get back in contact with it. And the more you feel it, the more you can control it, and the more powerful it becomes. Something happens when you have an injury. So like when you grow up, you heal much less than when you're young, but much in slower. I mean, much slower than when you're younger, for different reason. For you heal slower because the metabolism is slower, but also because you add up injuries in your life. So when you have an injury, something happened that it's a reflex. Like if you have a shoulder injury, for example, so your body, so like painful, so your brain is going to reduce the feeling of this area to reduce the feeling of pain. So when the injury goes away, it's still, you still don't feel this area as much as you did before. So the motion can like slowly get perverti, so it can become so it can switch, it can like the motion cannot be as good as it was before, like for your shoulder. And then you have a neck injury 2 years later, and then same thing happened in the neck, and then same thing happened. So like slowly you start like in the same area, sometimes having like a couple things that add up during the year, during the years during your life. And then after that, so when you get a big injury, all those little injury that you had in your life like kind of leave their mark. So we need to fix all of that to then fix your injury. So if you are more aware of your body and more aware of your movement, and you kind of you're able to slowly fix those movement discrepancy. I was looking for that word. Then you can much easily, when you get an injury, so okay, the movement is good. We just need to fix the injury rather than like trying to fix everything else around. So I would encourage people to connect more with their body, connect more with their breathing. Where are they breathing? How are they breathing? When are they breathing? How often are they breathing? Most people, they don't even realize that they're not breathing. And I'm like, yeah, it's normal. Your neck is tense. um, and having a routine, like a morning routine, for example. People that are like, okay, stiff in the rib cage, like, okay, this is something that caused you to be uncomfortable during your day, then you should be responsible of your body and then try to move this part when you can. It doesn't have to be something like disciplinary, okay, every time I wake up in the morning I'm going to move this. But when you think about it, try to do it. Try to give what your body needs when you feel that it needs it. So slowly, getting back to movement.
Yeah, and I think it's also about learning to just like, I think people have forgotten what it is to move, right? And I think that a lot of people have this mentality, like if I don't have an hour to go to the gym, then I just don't do anything. right? There's this idea that somehow I have to go to a gym, or I have to work with a trainer, or I have to, when you can just, take 10 minutes and just move around. And that's
Yeah,
going to,
yeah.
and if you do that consistently enough, it's a start, right? It's somewhere, because I think what you're talking about is someone like you're preaching to the converted, in the sense that I get it, but I think there's so many people that are still stuck, like, oh, I'm bad at sports, so I don't do anything. What? Like, why is that, right? Like, how do we do
Yeah.
that, Viviane? How do we get people to figure this out, that it's just
It,
about moving? And then once you start moving, maybe you'll find that thing, that specific thing that you latch onto, that you're passionate about. But you got to get there first. You got to just kind of, like you said, connect to the body and know your body, and kind of explore different types of movement. Like, how do we do that? How do we convince people to do that?
but it's just like giving options. Like my partner Jeremy Fizet, like
Yeah.
he gave sometimes for a client, for example, somebody that is not in, like a woman that was not in her body, doesn't do sport, anything, neck pain, and he's like, just like once a day, like put a song that you like and just like dance around with your shoulders. So like that was like the
The
first
shoulder
step. And then
dance. I
like,
like
okay, the
that.
shoulder dance, just dance while you do your dishes or whatever, just like move your shoulder, try to get the rhythm. And then so like rhythm is really good actually for the brain to connect with the
That's brilliant.
the body.
Yeah.
So that's one of the, like, for a quick not quick, but like one of a thing to try. And then it's just like trying to encourage people. So like, okay, it's hard for you to try to go to the gym or whatever, or try to go yoga session. Try just start with like putting your shoes on, and then go in direction of the gym. And like, even if you say you don't have time, if you just go to the gym for 10 minutes, it still counts. Just like trying to fit the habit, and trying to, the part of the habit is like going to the gym is part of the habit. Going to the gym and then doing the training is two different things. Like, try to like do step by step and divide it. And yeah,
Yeah.
I don't
I
know.
also
Trying
think,
different
but
things.
I also think in the world of COVID now, where people,
Mm-hmm.
some gyms unfortunately are no longer available in a lot of
Mm-hmm.
places. I think, but in a way that's kind of opened up a new world, right? Where it's like,
Mm-hmm.
hey, you can turn on your computer and find tons of options to move.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of really amazing people out there at this point putting out content that will teach you any form of movement you want, right? And maybe you could touch on that a little bit. How did you guys handle COVID? Because I think that as a business owner, it's something
Mm-hmm.
that a lot of people, especially in the health and fitness industry, have struggled with. So
Yeah,
what are
yeah.
some of the ways that, I know you guys, you seem to have made it through this to a certain extent, but I'd
Mm-hmm.
like to know a little bit about how you guys dealt with it.
But you gave example of like opening a computer to move, and but we haven't been in this direction for the movement and training. All the gym did that in the same time, but we're
Yeah.
not at, our first function is being a clinic
Yeah.
and a rehab clinic. And when everything shut down, we focused on our main activity, which is physiotherapy and rehab, because it was the safest thing, and it was the easiest thing to try to manage with that, like online and everything. I
Yeah, of
mean,
course.
so at first we had to shut down the doors completely. We did for 2.5 months online session, which was great actually. It was really cool. It made us change. It changed the way we're treating people. So we found like different like exercise, like self-treatment exercise, and how to do self-mobilization of your bones at home, and which had amazing results. For like, for sure, it's not exactly the same as when you. It's not the same as when you have it by a therapist, but I've been able to work with some of my guys in the other countries because of that. So it changed the way we're doing exercises, and we kept that with our clients in person. So we're like, oh, so I'm doing this articulation mobilization, and then, but at home, I want you to do it yourself. So here we found a way to how you can do it yourself. So that's for the physio part. And then for the other activities, it was like, um, so some of our activities, we stopped the group training, so yoga, the breath work, the like the group classes and those kind of things. For now, we're just like doing physio, occupational therapy. We got back to doing training, and we got back to doing movement education in small group, small like the rehab groups. Um, but it's actually a good thing because as we just opened a year ago, we opened a year ago with all the services, and which was really really cool, but it was so much work for us. So to try to implement and to try to make it uh, like we're a bit perfect, a bit of a perfectionist. So we want to do it the proper way. So right now we're focusing on like some things we want to do it the best way, and then so when COVID is going to be anyway, when we will know how the future is going to be, then we can get back to like the groups and everything and all the activities. But right now we're focusing only on like on these, just because we don't know how it's going to be in the future, in
I
the
think it's
short
amazing
future.
though that what you talked about, how you were forced to find ways to treat people online.
Yeah, yeah.
And now that you can still see them in person, you have this whole new tool set that you
Mhm.
probably never would have come up with if you weren't forced into
Mhm.
it. Right. And
Mhm.
then the fact that you can have one of your clients, hey, I'm going away to this other country, guess what? We can still work together to a certain
Yeah,
extent. And I think
yeah.
also what you're talking about is you're giving people autonomy with their own treatment, right?
Mhm.
Where you're teaching them
Mhm.
to do it for themselves. So
Yeah.
suddenly they're not as reliant on you, and they
Mm,
realize like, hey, there's some of this that I can take responsibility for. And I
mm,
think that's going to go a long way
yeah,
to helping your people get stronger and just be more responsible for their own bodies, which is
yeah, yeah.
amazing. That's
Which
really
is
cool.
amazing. Which is
Yeah.
amazing. And actually, like the follow-ups online were really interesting because like as you have the follow-up and we only give exercises, so if you haven't done it, it's worthless to see each other because we cannot progress. So people were more serious, really taking notes and like, okay, so you said the x number of reps, okay, I'm gonna write it down, because so like they takes notes, and then I was recording the sessions too and sending it to them, which is a good thing. So we got to understand how like when the person is really really responsible with their rehab, we didn't like we knew it, but like we really saw it, how like the big difference between being responsible and just like the people that come here and they're like, oh, treat me, and then you're like, you give you do the treatment, and then you're like, don't do they try not to do this, and then try to do this, and then you see them the week after and they're like, oh yeah, I still did what you told me not to do, and didn't have time to do my exercise, and I'm like, okay, don't come then.
Yeah.
But anyway, so we started, and then we had tools to make sure that to fix those things too.
Yeah. That's amazing. So what's next? Do you guys have plans for what's coming up, or are you really just still figuring it out, still post COVID, slowly reintegrating things, or is there any big stuff that you'd like to talk about?
But actually, like, so my summer was I really wanted to finish that, like the V1 of the method, the replay method, as I told you, which I'm finishing now right now in my vacation. My plan was to have it done for September 1st, and then uh, we're gonna hire more therapists, we're gonna get to so now as the method is done, so we're gonna hire people and get bigger and stronger, and then as in the physio and rehab, and starting November, December, actually starting November, we're gonna have a sports doctor here, like twice a month, and then we're gonna get like really focusing on the training and the movement optimization and like sports optimization, like the big thing, the cool
That's
stuff.
amazing. That's
Yeah, at the end
amazing.
of the year. Yeah.
Amazing. So what's the website again if people want to go see what you're up to?
www.centrereplay.com. So in French, CENTRE replay.com.
Amazing. So Viviane, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me. I think that there's some pretty amazing stuff here. I hope people listen. I hope people take it seriously. You only get one body, and it's kind of up to you to take care of it because no one else is going to do it for you. Right? Would you agree with that?
I agree 100% with that.
All right.
The
Well,
only
thank.
thing,
Yeah.
the only thing you truly own, is your body.
Yeah.
You
So take it seriously and
take
take
it
care of it,
seriously.
because as someone in
Yeah.
their 40s who didn't take it as seriously when I
Yeah.
should have, you're going to pay a price. You are going to pay a price. It's fun to do all the crazy stuff when you're young, but it gets harder when you get older. So if you want to be, able to move when you're older, take it seriously. All right, Viviane, thank you so much,
All right.
and we'll talk
Thank
soon.
you. All right.